All right, so the Bucks beat the living hell out of the Heat tonight. And what was scary about it was they didn't even play that well. They didn't even shoot that well. And they won by 29. I realized tonight watching it, the Laker fans aren't going to like this. Bucks Nets might be the finals. We might have the finals of round 2. And I went back and I looked up when was the last time this happened. And really the last time this happened was 2007 Suns Spurs, the Robert Horry shove, that whole series where it was like, it was just clear at some point whoever was going to win that series is going to win the finals. Now, in this time around, you have LeBron, you have Davis, you have the bigger Lakers. I'm not counting them out, but I just think the Bucks and the Bucks and the Nets are the two best teams right now. And I've seen everything I wanted to see from the Bucks. I thought they're going to win. I wagered on them. I expected them to win, but they've demolished the Heat. The holiday thing is so important. Rob, what's been the thing that's jumped out to you in these first 3 games?
I love it. I am basking in the glow of all the Bucks respect on this pod right now. This is a beautiful moment.
You like it.
I do like it. I mean, for me, the collision course between the Nets, the Bucks, and the Sixers was always the most interesting thing all throughout the season leading into the playoffs. This is what I was looking forward to, is these 2 rounds and how those 3 teams end up playing each other. I think what's most interesting about this matchup tactically is just the way the Bucks have completely flipped the Giannis wall against Bam. And they've completely neutralized him in a way where I almost think last year the Bucks didn't fully appreciate how good Bam was, or at least they didn't fully appreciate what made him so good. And now they've really teched in on his strengths and weaknesses. They're really playing him about as effectively as anyone can. And when I knew the Heat were in trouble in this particular game is when Bam had Bobby Portis on the baseline about 15 feet from the basket, and Bobby Portis just backed all the way up. And Bam had nothing to do. He had nowhere to go. That is a gigantic problem. And, Kevin O'Connor did a great video about this for The Ringer today, kind of outlining what Bam's next steps can be. And I think that's got to be a huge part of the Heat's formula going forward. But the reality is the Bucks have had the 3 best players in this series so far.
Yeah.
There's just no way for the Heat to win if that's gonna be the case. And I think that was kind of lurking in the background of all the noise going on with Milwaukee all season. That was a team that they had injuries. They had, Drew Holiday out with the health and safety protocols. They were trying all this new stuff with their defense and their offense, trying to figure themselves out. Some of the players on that team felt really confident with the way they ended up in terms of the standings and the win-loss and their, some of the bigger metrics, given everything that had been going on, saying, if that was the noise of our season and we still ended up doing pretty well, what is it going to look like when all the numbers, all the experience with Drew and Chris and Giannis on the floor say this team is really freaking good? And now we're seeing what that looks like when those guys can trade off and at the same time just completely lock the Heat up defensively, which I think is the most important part of that game.
Yeah, Bucks Nets the finals for you, Kyle?
Well, there was another one you forgot in there too. What 2018 Warriors Rockets was that the 0-for-27 game? The one that series
that was conference finals. The next year was round 2, and we felt like that was going to be the finals. But then, Durant never came back, and Clay got hurt in the finals. But in the moment, it was like, wow, round 2, this is the finals, and then Toronto wins the title. So that's the rub with this question, but. It does feel like this could be considered retroactively in September. Like we'll look back and we're like, yeah, Bucks Nets, that was it.
I mean, it's going to be incredible. I can't wait. I'm kind of just going to echo what Rob said, and that just you asked him what stood out, and Rob said, "I love it." That was his answer.
I do love it. I can't help myself.
He just, I love it, and just started hitting his head. So it's that. That's going to be must-see TV in terms of like basketball. If you're just a hardcore basketball fan, regardless of who you root for. I mean, the Lakers fans are going to take umbrage with your question, I think for sure, because it's going to be
those guys.
Yeah. When I said I wasn't agreeing with Bill. You guys can aim that at Bill, not me. Anyway, so no, I mean, I think it's a case of Milwaukee it's 2 things at once. Milwaukee is going hardcore this direction in a positive direction, and Miami. Like the fact that when you take away that uphill gravity of like coming up to guard Bam, like their whole offense was predicated on that. It's like literally just like Kalima reaching in and pulling their heart out. Like nothing is going to function if you can't get the pressure uphill to guard Bam. Like, because a lot of their 3-man game was Bam comes up and sets a screen and the big guy's up. Well, when Lopez hangs back, those 3-man actions are just rolling downhill like a grease trap into that's a horrible metaphor, but into Lopez, and he's just walled up standing there, and that just negates it. And I think on the other flip side of that is that Milwaukee is just much more balanced. And this was like the simple thing that, like, that's what a secondary playmaker does for somebody like Giannis, is that, like, their whole thing was like just aiming downhill, relentless pressure downhill, and then kicking to shooters. Well, I was watching tonight, man, their offense was so fluid. They're always like one switch away from having like a great player drive to the basket that can create. And they didn't have that last year, because whenever Bledsoe, they had like older shooters out there that couldn't attack when you were watching them play Miami. Like, they throw it, everybody would just catch it standing flat-footed, and like they would never get any separation. And it's like tonight I was watching them. I think every shot they took in the first quarter was in rhythm. And if they didn't hit it, they got the rebound, and then they got another one. Miami just looked lost. They couldn't generate the offense. The guys that would orbit Bam in the sense that we were talking about, they looked less confident, like you were talking about. And, yeah, they just really, really struggled to score, and it was eye-opening. It was an ass-kicking, all-out ass-kicking.
My Celtics buddy Hench texted me at halftime and was just so upset about, at that point, Dragic, Duncan Robinson, Hero, and then Jay Crowder in the first half of the Laker game. They were combined 8 for 35. And he was like, where the was this during the Eastern Finals last year, when all of these guys were just unconscious? And it does feel like we're going to look back at that bubble run they had, where it was like Dragic, that's the best he's looked in, I don't know, 5 years, something like that. Robinson and Hero were both having these moments, and they really miss Crowder. Like the Crowder to Ariza Iguodala drop off has been massive. But I'm actually getting retroactively more bummed out about that Celtics series. Hero has that crazy game. Iguodala has the game, and the clinchy game, he hits 5 threes. Like, you just go back, and then Bam, who we couldn't figure out how to defend that whole series, and Milwaukee solved it in 5 minutes. And now Bam has to go back to the drawing board, like KOC put on that video. But I got retroactively bummed out about it. If you're the Heat, what do you, first of all, do you feel like you missed an opportunity to trade for somebody who wasn't Oladipo? Like, should you have gone in for Lowry? Because I kind of feel like this is okay. I would have rather have not made that trade. I didn't mind the Oladipo trade. I don't think I would have gone all in, because I don't think it was going to make a difference anyway. They weren't going to beat Milwaukee this year. What would you have done, Rob?
Well, they might still get Lowry. You know, there's always, especially with Miami in particular, and the way they work as a free agent destination, there's always a longer game in play. And they're a team that historically has been able to move salary whenever they need to move it to get whoever they need to get in those situations. So I wouldn't count them out of any kind of big picture plans in terms of who's available. But yeah, the Oladipo thing was not going to move the needle in this series. I was actually thinking about that during this game. If you have Oladipo catching in some of these situations, that Hero or Robinson, or maybe the one spot would be if you could take Trevor Ariza off the floor a little more and have someone more dynamic in that position. Because having Ariza out there is really what allowed Milwaukee to hide their worst defenders in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
It's, they got to sneak Bryn Forbes on the floor to run pick and roll with Giannis. That inverted Bryn Forbes Giannis pick and roll is just brutal to guard. And the only way you can do it is you have to attack Bryn Forbes, and they couldn't do it. That's one thing the Nets will do relentlessly. And that's going to be the big difference in that kind of matchup, is with these role players on the Bucks. If the Nets are able to kind of pick and choose who they want to attack a little bit more and go at those guys with 3 of the best isolation players in basketball, can Bryn Forbes stay on the floor? Can Dante DiVincenzo hold up in a series? I have no idea, but I don't think it would have made a difference one way or another what Miami did. They weren't getting out against a Bucks team that's defending like this.
The Ariza thing's funny because it's almost like an actor that you see in a movie that in your head is younger, but then you realize it's like, oh, that guy's 51 now. It's like if you saw the Friends reunion on HBO Max, it's like, oh, Matt LeBlanc is now a middle-aged guy in his mid-50s. Wow, that's weird. I just saw him on Netflix the other day and he was young. Ariza's 35. Just in the last 4 years, he played for Houston, Phoenix, Washington, Portland, Sacramento, Miami. This is just in the last, since the 2018 season. He hasn't been good in 2 years. But and it should have been a much bigger red flag that heading into these playoffs, he was playing 30 minutes a game. But it's like, oh, it's Trevor Ariza. He's veteran. He's been around. It's like him and Iguodala, like you against a team that's as athletic as the Bucks are. That's suicide to play those guys the amount of time they're playing. They just see, and they had no plan B. And, you know, in a weird way, this probably works out okay for them. But it's funny how Milwaukee goes from this traumatic bubble loss to now the sweep, lock it down. That like that. Not only will they sweep, but I could see that being a 20-point game. Kyle, they've won the last 9 quarters, Milwaukee, dating back to the OT in game 1. Every quarter they've won. This has been a demolition.
Yeah, it seems like they have really taken this personally, where I was just kind of like, I like to watch the lead, kind of like where it goes, you know, because you don't want to. They haven't even let Miami get moral victories. Like they like won't even let the lead get down to 20. They just kept pushing it out and out and out and like attacking. And what really struck me about this game is that they have some really like legit shot creators. I mean, like on this team, like, I mean, Middleton probably still doesn't get enough credit for how great a shot creator he is.
Yeah.
And you know, Holiday, I think it should just, he's fantastic. But what really struck me is that like throughout this game, they were just running their offense. Like they have some guys that can go get you late clock buckets, and their offense was so unbothered that it never even came to that. So I like, it just shows me that like, they have another gear potentially that they could go to against some of these better teams that they're going to face. And the Brooklyn thing is interesting because, you know, yeah, Brooklyn's going to be able to pick on some of the things that they do, but Milwaukee offensively is playing so well now because they're so dynamic, because they have creators at like their 2, 3, 4 spots, that they're going to force Brooklyn to guard them. I mean, you know that for sure.